Hello out there, and welcome back to the GamecockScoop.com podcast, the official podcast of Gamecock Scoop on Rivals. Be sure to go check out GamecockScoop.com for all the latest updates on SEC Media Days and everything else that's been going on here lately. We haven't had a podcast for a minute. That was by design right there at the beginning of July because we were taking a week off for the holiday, and then things just kind of have been weird from a personal standpoint over the last month or so with just like travel and family and whatever. So we're back to doing these hopefully weekly, and then the season's right around the corner, and we'll do them twice a week once the season kicks in. We're not going to try to catch up on everything that has happened in the last 20 days. We're primarily talking about SEC Media Days. Alan's actually in a hotel still in Nashville. Today was South Carolina and Tennessee's focus day for the SEC Media Days. Anyone else?
Ole Miss.
And Ole Miss. So plenty to talk about from that standpoint. I do want to start with a little bit of recruiting news. So if you've been keeping up with the weekly recruiting wrap-ups on GamecockScoop.com, which I encourage you to do if you don't, there's been a little bit of turmoil over the last month. So there are two different recruits that South Carolina led for at one point that they lost out on at the last minute. That is Keelan Adams, wide receiver out of Virginia, who ended up at Virginia Tech, and Malcolm Ziegler, cornerback that ended up at North Carolina. And now you have Jonathan Paylor, who's set to announce his commitment August 5th. And it's down to NC State and South Carolina. And it felt for a very long time like South Carolina was the clear leader there. But that doesn't seem so clear anymore with seemingly Paylor's going to skip the cookout and go to NC State instead next weekend. So not great. A lot of the reason that, as I'm asking around, talking to people about what's really going on, it's not like South Carolina coaches pulled back on any of these guys, or the effort isn't there, the relationships aren't there, whatever. The biggest thing that keeps coming up in all of these situations is NIL. Which I know you got a quote from Beamer at Media Days a little bit talking about some of that stuff, but hopefully we'll have a little bit more info. We're trying to reach out to some people at the university to get some specifics about the NIL programs. We know that there are a lot of partnerships there. There are a couple collectives. I'll mention them, even though they are quote unquote owned by competitors, because the collectives are their own thing that are not media based or whatever. And it's a way to give players if that's what you want. So Carolina Rise and Garnet Trust are two of the collectives. And then you have programs like the Gamecock Exchange, which we've utilized a few times to talk to players and do interviews with players and kind of expand their brands a little bit. You have the Park Avenue guys, which are kind of working on management stuff. So there is a pretty robust NIL program at South Carolina, but it seems like in a lot of these recent scenarios, it's been the case of in-state guys getting a little bit of a overpay, I guess, or maybe not an overpay because they're talented people, right? Ziegler and Adams are both very talented, but I guess a bigger chunk or a bigger upfront sort of NIL deal is being thrown forward. I don't want to speculate too much about whether or not South Carolina could match the offer or anything like that, or even like what that program fully is looking like. We've seen some of the deals get announced out loud with some of the major players, right? Like Rattler had the truck dealership deal. I know Nicholas Harbor, I think, has a deal with Beats by Dre. Like some of the bigger names are having no problem sort of making those connections through the system at South Carolina. But I wonder if the incoming high school recruits are being treated a little bit differently. I don't know. Those are some questions that I have that I'm gonna hopefully track down and write a full article on in the next couple of weeks. What did Beamer say kind of about some of that stuff in your Was
So
that the smaller gaggle? He didn't.
that's in the smaller gaggle. He got a question about kind of recruiting, and I don't remember how it was worded exactly, but it was more like, all right, there hasn't been a commit, there hasn't been a welcome home in a month now. What's kind of happening there? Should fans be worried? And the quote from Beamer here says I'm itching for it too. You realize that it's a marathon. I think our fan base, anyone that follows recruiting, also needs to take a look back and realize the amount of guys that we've got committed at the beginning of the season that every team in the country would love to have committed to their roster right now. I think there's some truth to that. This is me talking. I think there's some truth to that. You've got 13. Is it 13 commits right now? Is that what the number?
I'll count them real quick. It's been a minute.
Okay, you do have a good.
Yeah.
Back to Beamer. That was a really, really big deal. It's still a really big deal now. Do I wish we had more welcome home tweets the month of July? Absolutely, but the month isn't over. We'll see what happens. You realize it's a marathon. Signing day is 5 months away. There's a lot that's going to happen between now and then. It's not like we're not in the mix for guys. As a competitor, I don't want to lose. I don't want to lose anyone. But I learned a long time ago as a coach that you're going to lose more guys than you get in recruiting. Some guys chose to go elsewhere over the last month or so. Here's an interesting part. Whether they chose to stay with their in-state school or go play with the defending national champs, whatever it might be. I don't like that, but let's not forget about the guys that are committed to us and will make up the bulk of the 2023 class. And then there were two different points today. This is going back to Ziegler and Paler, I think. Two different points today where he was asked about Travian Robertson, the new defensive line coach, and he made a point of mentioning that Travian Robertson was a North Carolina born kid, a highly rated recruit who chose to come to South Carolina, and they need more of those. He mentioned that two different times, which is not subtlety is not really his strong suit. But
yeah, so I did think that was interesting, right? Jonathan Paler, North Carolina kid, he's set to commit in just about 2 weeks or so here. I do think that was a little bit of a shout out to him, which we talked about this at Media Days last year. He's always in recruiting mode. And a lot of what his speech was today was selling the program, selling the momentum, selling like all those things, why you want to be a part of it. But yeah, as far as recruiting strategy goes, it's been kind of interesting because they definitely are taking big swings. By the way, I think that they're still in pretty good position with Dylan Stewart, who we've had a future cast in on Gamecock Scoop since November of 2022. And then a couple of other people on Twitter or whatever kind of started to get on board in the last few weeks. And I also think that they're still in good shape with Daniel Hill, although Daniel Hill lives pretty close to Alabama. I believe it's like a 45-minute drive from his house in Mississippi. And I think he's attending Alabama's cookout next week, which, I mean, you could say maybe that's just purely like it's an easy drive, 45 minutes versus 6 hours or whatever to South Carolina. But obviously competing against Bama is always going to be a little bit of a struggle. Although I think right now you should still feel pretty good about Daniel Hill. So it's not all doom and gloom. They've taken some big swings. We've also seen both off seasons so far. They tend to rely a good bit on the portal and have had some success at filling positions in the portal. So like it's a strategy that can work, having like a little bit of a smaller recruiting class and then leaving those spaces open for the portal as long as you hit. And we saw at a position like running back this offseason that sometimes if you miss on all of them, then you end up starting a wide receiver at running back. By the way, I think everything that I'm hearing chatter-wise about Dakarian Joyner is that he's really adjusting well to the position. I know that came up a few times at Media Days as well.
Yep.
So I'm not saying like he's not going to be successful as a running back, but obviously if you had a true running back that you got out of the portal or whatever on the roster, he's probably not slated to be the starter like it looks like he is right now. So yeah, I hear what the fan base is saying right now with some of the doom and gloom, and that it's no doubt that you have lost a couple of guys that you at one point led for lately. But I also think the strategy sound. Those guys didn't forget how to recruit all of a sudden. And yeah, there might need to be some more attention to what the NIL strategy is to make sure that that stays competitive. I was trying to figure out just by Googling kind of where South Carolina stands in the pecking order of the SEC as far as their NIL funds go. And the best I could figure is there's somewhere, this is including Texas and Oklahoma. So if there's 16 teams, there's somewhere between 12 and 14 out of 16, which isn't great, but I also think that you can make that work. Um, I don't know. I'm interested to kind of see what I can dig up in the next few weeks about how the last year, which we saw a lot of changes in South Carolina's NIL program over the last year with the partnership with Park Avenue, with the introduction of the Gamecock Exchange, with bringing some more attention to Carolina Rise and Garnet Trust as far as the university itself, kind of promoting those. I'm wondering how that's going basically. So hopefully we get a little more info on that here shortly. All right, let's shift our focus more to SEC Media Days. If you go to gamecockscoop.com right now, you can see like kind of a summary article that I wrote on his main podium appearance, which of course was also streamed on SEC Network and stuff. What were your takeaways from that? And we can get into some of the more little side gaggles and stuff where you got to talk to some players and hear from them a few other times. What was your takeaway from the main stage experience?
Yeah, I think the big thing here, and you always, when you're looking at a main stage, all right, they're not getting into anything nuts and bolts. They're not giving you government secrets. It's on television. You got to take that with a grain of salt. You're more looking for, okay, what are they trying to sell? What do they want you to know? What do they want the 1,000 people here that are credentialed to leave thinking, the ones that maybe don't cover South Carolina? And I think the whole message here is it's going really well. He was quick to mention the season ticket sales, the social media, the energy, all of that. It all has to be better, was his kind of message. He mentioned offense got to be better. Can't turn the ball over as much. Got to stop the run better. Everything needs to be better. Got to be more consistent. That was his main thing. He mentioned, I think, 3 different times how they scored 6 points against Florida, then scored 63 the next week against Tennessee. Clearly that stuck with him, the kind of Jekyll and Hyde, peak and valley nature of that team last year. So that was kind of my general, everything has to be better, although it's going really well right now. And then if I could, I wrote a little bit about this later too, but there's one line, if I had to pick out, that I thought was interesting and he was up front and he said, we're going to have a lot of true freshmen playing at pretty much every position. And I did a little bit of speculating. I'll be on the website later, kind of about what that might mean.
Yeah,
but
and I'd be interested to. Yeah, no, I was just going to say I'd be interested to speculate with you right now. Nick Harbor, like you just mentioned, I think that you probably have a couple O linemen in mind there.
Anderson was the one that came to mind for me.
Big Tree, maybe Jatavius Shivers. Because
DJ Braswell, I mean, you're going to need running backs from somewhere.
I think without a doubt, Braswell is going to get a lot of play. He also might get a look at punt returner, which he did a good bit, or kick returner, which he did a good bit in high school.
You still have Leggett too.
Right. And you brought in the Eddie Lewis for punt returner, so maybe not, but he did do some of that in high school, so we'll see. On defense, you're going to definitely see some freshmen at linebacker. Pup Howard's probably going to play a lot.
Yeah.
Maybe some edge like Desmond Umeozulu.
That's kind of what I was speculating too. You need bodies there.
And then in the secondary, I mean, Jalen Kilgore looked really good.
Xavier McLeod too. Like I think he's going to play a little bit.
Yeah, that's a good point. And then obviously, if you're counting like JUCO guys, Elijah Davis is going to play a ton. Right. But yeah, so I mean that tracks. I did think it was funny that he started off his speech referencing your stat about
the word
count from last year, which kind of went a little viral, and then people from other websites stole it and created a graphic and didn't credit you, which is kind of annoying, but whatever. Eventually, he saw it either from us or from Saturday Down South or all those other places that stole it. But anyway, he mentioned that his kids basically were like, hey, don't talk so much this year.
He did pretty much the exact same thing.
Yeah, the word count was almost to the word the same as last year, and he got second again. Not that actually matters. I tweeted earlier that like he could have talked for another hour and it would have been fine with me because I just am starving for football and content right now. So talk your stuff, Shane. That was
talking season.
Yeah,
that's aptly named.
Exactly. So yeah, I don't have a problem with that at all. He is an ambassador for the program, and like we've talked about before, he's gonna be in salesman mode pretty much all the time. Um, a couple of other things that stood out to me from the main stage appearance: turnovers. He mentioned as a huge emphasis, both offensively and defensively. I had kind of forgotten that they have or I guess been in last place in the SEC, but led the SEC in offensive turnovers the past 2 years, which is something that they're trying to clean up. But they've also been first and second in defensive turnovers, so it's kind of balanced out a little bit. If you can keep the defensive opportunities high and clean up the offensive ones a little bit, I think that accounts for probably one or two more wins right there. Which actually next week will be a good episode to listen to. We're going to go into our staff picks across the board, but also you can go ahead and read those on GamecockScoop.com if you want. We were optimistic. Something that the SEC Network crew was talking about today, because I watched it on TV while you were in the room, was that South Carolina's win total was like 5.5 or something from Vegas, and I think all of us picked at least 8 wins in the staff picks. So something's got to give there. Other
5.5 does feel low to me.
That feels very low.
We'll get into it next week, but yeah, I guess other things I would take from today. He did mention just a couple like housekeeping things. Someone asked him if they're exploring any more portal options. He said no. So the roster's the roster now. No real surprise there. But Jalen Nichols, not ready for camp. Again, we knew that was going to be the case. I don't know how much you're going to see him at all this year. The media guide quoted Nichols as, I actually wrote it down, but unlikely or will miss most, if not all of the season. So that's in the South Carolina media, which we knew, and he said nobody else is going to be injured for the start of camp. He said Jordan Strachan and Mo Kava off their respective ACL tears will be a little bit limited to start, but quote, should be 100% for week 1. So on the injury front, aside from, your starting left tackle is a devastating blow, but other than the one we already knew about, you're okay on the injury front going into camp?
Yeah, and we're expecting probably Ja'Kai Moore to start off the season there.
I think it has to be. I wrote some words about this today too that'll be on the site either tonight or tomorrow. Ja'Kai Moore is the only guy on this roster who's played left tackle at South Carolina other than Nichols. Now, you've got options there. Like Tyshawn Wanamaker's played right tackle. Do you want to kick him to left? You might have to if something happens to Moore. Cason Henry's raw, but the staff likes him. He was in games last year. He's only played right tackle. Nick Gargiulo played all 5 spots at Yale, but left tackle was not his main position. Is that an option? I don't know. Do you want him on the interior? Sidney Fugar, he's played right tackle. You've got a whole lot of guys that have played right tackle. And I think the challenge for this staff over the next 44 days till North Carolina is figuring out who you feel comfortable putting at left tackle if something happens to Ja'Kai Moore, because I do think that is your starter, but you got to figure out the rest of the depth chart quickly.
A couple of the freshmen, Anderson projects as a potential left tackle eventually, but is he ready? It's hard to be a freshman starting at left tackle in SEC for sure. A couple of other just like little notes that I noticed. He said that the team last season had the highest GPA in South Carolina history, like not just his history here, but in the university's history, which I thought was pretty cool. Like you mentioned, ticket sales up 106%. So obviously some enthusiasm there. I thought a couple of things were small but interesting as far as just clarifying notes. He talked a little bit more about his relationship with Dowell Loggins, and it really sounds like that they had been in touch for the last several years after being friends, years and years ago, meeting on coaching staff. And that we have talked about this, that he really likes the blend of the NFL concepts with the time that he spent on offensive staffs in college. Arkansas and Penn State are the two that he mentioned there. And then the other thing was that it sounds like Dakereon Joyner is made the permanent move to running back. We kind of speculated on that a little bit last week when we saw it come up in the media guide on GamecockScoop.com. But it said basically someone in one of the gaggles, I guess yesterday or today, called him a wide receiver, or the MC called him a wide receiver, and Takarian Joyner corrected him and said, "I'm running back." So it seems like both everyone is kind of like bought into that position shift.
We can speculate that. I'm sure we will between now and September 2nd. That is quite a gamble if that's what you're going with. And I realize some of it is necessity based and it's going to be running back by committee in a lot of cases, but yeah, it's a hole. There's no way around it.
Yeah, I mean, they did while I was watching the SEC Network broadcast, they did show a couple of his quarterback keep plays from the last couple of seasons that worked out pretty well. And I mean, I need to go back and watch a little bit more tape, but if you go back and watch the tape, I think he definitely moves like a running back at times with the ball in his hands. I'm interested to see how much this offseason he has bulked up. I believe I told you if he ate a lot of ice cream and milkshakes or whatever, then maybe it could work out because he definitely is a little on the lighter side for running back, but he's got the height already. So if he filled out his frame a little bit and completely just is leaning into it, I could see it working. We haven't done bold predictions and stuff yet, but I'm starting to formulate one around DK and how many yards he puts together this season based on what I'm hearing and the little bit of film that I've watched so far. So we'll see.
Yeah, and then I guess kind of your other concern. We've talked about left tackle. We talked about running back. Your edge situation would be another one. We hit on that a little bit with Undi Zulu might play. Kind of what's that going to look like is another question I have that wasn't really talked about a lot today. You're getting Jordan Strawn back. What does that look like off 2 ACL tears or a second ACL tear? Brian Thomas Jr., you're going to need some things from. I think that's
again, Gear coming in from Syracuse.
Yep. These are all questions for camp, but they're things you're kind of thinking about now, just as we're kind of, like I said, into talking season. And Lenora Sellers, I wanted to hit on that too. He was asked about Sellers and the gaggle. Lenora Sellers, who weighs 245 pounds now, at least if the media guide is to be believed, he bulked up big time since he got to campus. Beamer, he was bully. He was, coy. He wasn't saying. It's kind of a tough question to answer when you have Spencer Rattler here, but he did say Lenore's has a bright future at our place. He showed us in spring practice. He mentioned that he opened a lot of eyes, and that kind of tracks with everything we heard during the spring and what we saw in the spring game. But that's a weird one to kind of think about, just because, again, if there's a scenario where Lenora Sellers is playing quarterback, it means something went wrong.
Right.
But also that Lenora Sellers clearly has something about him. Those are weird things to juggle, but
yeah, it's interesting. So I'm planning on doing a preseason look at some of the off-season rumors and things that I've been hearing about workouts and everything like that. And it's possible that the last two additions to the 2023 class might end up being some of the most impactful. So like you said, Sellers, who probably won't be a huge impact this year, but sounds like diamond in the rough, like we've kind of mentioned him a couple times. And then Elijah Caldwell, wide receiver that got added pretty late. I've heard a lot of really good stuff. Maybe the most developed of the freshman wide receivers thus far. Now, again, maybe don't feel that impact this season because the wide receiver room's so deep. And of course, you have to figure out how to work in your tight ends, your Trey Knoxes, your Josh Simon. Yeah. And then obviously
tight end room.
You're going to definitely try to get the ball in Nicholas Harbor's hands. So maybe he doesn't pop immediately, but that's someone that I'm hearing was a hit, even though he was a late addition there. So
yeah, that's kind of the takes from today. I don't know if you had anything else kind of
so
days, but
I mean, I'm looking through some of the notes that you had from the little gaggles and stuff. Were there any takeaways from the specific players that you got to talk to?
Yeah, I'll have some more stuff next week. Tonka Hemingway seems primed for a big year. I think you can make that statement. A, he's going to be playing a ton of snaps because they're going to need him. B, he seems to be a little bit bigger than he was last year. He mentioned he was playing inside right now, not outside. I think Travian Robertson's another thing you can point to today that Beamer was excited about. Tonka was excited about. Players in general seem to be excited about kind of what's already happening there as, new defensive line coach. I'm kind of sneaky in on Tonka this year. I think that's just something that's going to work. You talk about bold predictions. Maybe he leads this team in sacks. I don't know. I got a few weeks to think about it, but I kind of felt better about, maybe not better is the right word because I wasn't feeling bad, but you feel good about Tonka Hemingway going into this year, I think.
Did anyone ask him about moving around? Are we expecting him to play some on the outside too?
I asked him. He said right now he's working inside. He wouldn't say if he's never going to be playing outside or anything, but he said right now it's just doing inside work.
Yeah, and I think we saw Elijah Davis more in that role, I guess, during the spring where he was moving out. And then, like you said, we brought in Jatius Gear since then as well. Yeah, so maybe and Strahan's back. Maybe you're feeling a little bit better about the D-line at this point than you were a few months ago. I know that the run game, like the run defense, is something that came up a couple of times today.
Yep.
That's definitely going to be a point of emphasis. But honestly, something that I think for some reason I'm feeling optimistic that that's going to be better than it was last year. I think it's because there's a little bit more talent at linebacker. Now you don't have as much experience at linebacker, so I don't know if those two things sort of cancel each other out. You also have two safeties that have a year under their belt that are both willing to come up and stop the run.
That was a Beamer comment today too on the main stage about C-gap run stopping safeties, corners.
Right. So I actually am feeling sort of optimistic about that, but they get tested pretty much immediately defensively, although maybe a little bit more through the air in week 1 against North Carolina. I watched a little bit of the SEC Network broadcast and like some of the things that they were saying about South Carolina. They mentioned the over-under at 5.5. They weren't super bullish about it, that being too low, although a couple of them, kind of acknowledged that Shane Beamer and the way that they run special teams, the way that they kind of take chances on 4th down, the way that they are good for a trick play or two in an opportune time, whatever, so far has earned a couple of extra wins. And so they think that maybe the 5.5 is underestimating that element. And then, I mean, we both just went through the schedule whenever we did the staff picks. It's not as scary looking to me as it was when we looked in the spring, and I don't know why. But I think the rub is, how do you start? Can you?
That's kind of everybody I've talked to this week, just other media members, people. It's kind of that start, right? I mean, that's a big. I mean, we can't say it enough. We're going to say it enough in the next 6 weeks. That is a huge week 1 game, just in terms of being a coin flip and kind of what that can do for you or do against you. You got to go to Georgia. You got to go to Tennessee. You got a Mississippi State team that I am not remarkably high on, but I still think is dangerous and can pose some problems for you in week 4. You have the bye week in week 6. And I think, honestly, if you're asking questions about this season, it's what's the record of the bye week? Because I think most reasonable people would say you're going to beat Furman and lose to Georgia. And then it comes down to, you've got 3 games at North Carolina, neutral site, Mississippi State at home, Tennessee on the road. So you got a neutral, a home, a road, 3 games, 3 different situations, reasonably toss-up-y, I think, to some degree or another. 2-1, 1-2, 3-0, 0-3. I think that might be your season, those 3 toss-ups.
And I think the reason that each of us, and we'll go game by game next week when we talk about it, but I think the reason each of us ended up at 8 or more wins is because we had them going 2-1 out of those games that you're mentioning.
I think that's what it's going to have to be.
But it very easily could go off the rails if you lose to both North Carolina and Mississippi State. I mean, you still could battle back to a 6-6 season at that point or whatever, but all of your upside is gone if you lose those 2 games, I think.
Yeah, for sure. I kind of think everyone's talking about this ending they have, this 4-game homestand they're going to have November with this Jacksonville State, Vanderbilt, Kentucky, Clemson. People feeling good about that, but if you go into September 3-5, I mean, your upside, like I said, your upside's gone. At that point, you're just fighting to make a bowl game. You're gonna have to beat one of Kentucky or Clemson to make that happen. I think this comes down to September, which is a scary proposition, but maybe not as scary as it would have been last year when you were breaking a new quarterback and everything like that.
Yeah, and for those of you that are curious, on GamecockScoop.com, I've already done the first 4 weeks of the season previews, looking at what teams have coming back, how they match up with South Carolina, etc. I did pick them so far to beat North Carolina and Mississippi State, but they're both very tight games. And so I was I did Mississippi State most recently, and I was pretty struck by how much they have returning, which is quite a lot on both sides of the ball, including their quarterback that was very good last year. Now, was he good because of Mike Leach's system? Is that going to be different? Now, granted, their defense was very good last year too, and now their defensive coordinator is their head coach. So I think they're one of the hardest. Mississippi State's one of the hardest to project their whole schedule, really. And then, how they're going to match up against South Carolina. But I think the key really to the season is Spencer Rattler the guy we saw the last 3 weeks of?
Got a question in there about that today. Not at media days. I wrote a thing like biggest questions coming out of media days, and one of them is Rattler. That's the.
And that was a lot of what the SEC broadcasts kind of focused on too. If he is that guy, I think sky's the limit. Outside of maybe Georgia, you should be able to compete with any team on the schedule. If he's as inconsistent as he was last year, then I think you're middle of the pack once again. So that'll be the question.
It's consistency was another big word from everybody really today. I think I heard that even Kai Kroger, I think someone asked him, kind of tongue in cheek, but also kind of serious, like, what can you improve on? And he said, so I need to work on my drop time. If it drops off by a second, it can mess up a punt. You can shank it. I've been working on timing, trying to get hang to like, everything has to be more consistent. Everything has to be better. Again, kind of tying it full circle tone from everybody today. I don't want to use the word urgency because I think everybody has urgency. It's college football. It's the SEC. Like, I think you're always kind of in the pressure cooker, but I think there is a real sense of that we need to take advantage of the momentum, kind of strike while the iron's hot kind of thing. Like, you got Rattler back, you got Wells back, you got all this momentum. You won 8 games last year. You're tracking for another really strong recruiting class. Like, the time is now to make something happen.
Yeah, I mean, really, in a lot of ways, and I think I personally feel much better about the Beamer era thus far than I did about the Muschamp era thus far, probably because you had Muschamp's history at Florida to kind of always keep that doubt creeping in your mind, whereas this is Beamer's first head coaching job. But there's a lot of similarities heading into year 3 for both of those tenures as far as where the momentum feels like it's at and whether or not you can seize it. Obviously, year 3 of the Muschamp tenure did not seize it. I believe they opened that season with a loss to North Carolina, if I'm not mistaken.
In Charlotte.
So we'll see if Beamer is able to seize that momentum, because you're right. There's plenty of positive plenty of things going in the positive direction, but if you don't take advantage of it this year, quick. Then exactly.
Especially with the schedule, it can go. We could be sitting here before September's out, and they're 1-3, 1-4, 2-3. Like, it goes quick in the SEC, and especially when you have a front-loaded schedule.
Yeah. Well, I am definitely stoked to get started and see how it's all going to play out. And this was the official kickoff sort of SEC media days. Always makes me feel like, right, football season's here. Before the media picks come out, which I think they'll probably come out any time
tomorrow.
Now. It's tomorrow. I thought it was this afternoon for some reason.
The ballot deadline is 5:00 Nashville time today, which it's 3:49 here now. And then they tally it all up tonight and they release it tomorrow morning.
Let's hear your predictions. Who's give me a rundown of the East.
I can't remember what I put now. I think I have it on the website too, but Georgia 1, Tennessee 2, South Carolina 3, Kentucky 4, Missouri 5, Vanderbilt 6, Florida 7, I think is what I put.
Wow, Florida last.
I am very capital B bad for Florida. I didn't think they were that good last year. When you lose Anthony Richardson, I'm not a big believer in that defense either. I do think the running back, ETN, he's back. That's going to be a problem. I also think their non-con schedule is brutal. They're going on the road to Utah week 1 in altitude, obviously, and then they play Florida State, obviously, at the end of the year. Florida State's a team a lot of people are high on, myself included. I put them in the playoff. Spoiler alert, Gamecock scoop picks. Yeah, I'm pretty out on Florida. I don't know.
I mean, there's also a scenario where halfway through the season they fire their head coach, and then the wheels completely come off. So
it's also worth remembering too. Like I say that like it's outlandish, and I understand how it sounds putting Vanderbilt ahead of Florida. It just doesn't. It's like saying 2 + 2 is 5, kind of. But Vanderbilt did beat them last year head to head. There is something to that.
Honestly, I was trying to find a way to put Vanderbilt at 6th whenever I put in my picks as well. And I just put them at 6th and Missouri at 7th, and I think Florida at 5th. But I think I could see any of those 3 kind of being
Vanderbilt's Missouri's another one. I've got questions. Brady Cook's back. I don't know
good thing?
Exactly. You've got this Sam Horn, who was a 4-star, and he hurt himself playing baseball in the spring, and we're not really sure what's going to happen with that. Couple good skill position players. There's a lot of questions there too.
But South Carolina is yet to beat Missouri under Shane Beamer. So
that's another we're talking about. Just again, we're going to do it next week. But breaks, points in the schedule, that back-to-back 2 road trip, Mizzou A&M.
Yeah,
I kind of think you go 1-1 there, just it's hard to win on the road 2 weeks in a row, and I think they're talented enough to win one of those games. I think I had them winning Mizzou and losing A&M. I think, but it's hard to win both those games. And if you're a South Carolina fan and you offer them, okay, you're going to win 1, lose 1, I think you take the Mizzou win, right? Just to like stop dealing with Eli Drinkwitz beating you every year.
Yeah, I think that's. I mean, it'd be really cool to go into A&M and get a win there, but
sure, I guess there's a debate to be had there. But if you could only have 1,
yeah, get the Mizzou monkey off your back for sure.
Yeah, like Kentucky last year.
Yeah, exactly. So I think my East is basically the same. I definitely have the same 1, 2, and 3: Georgia, Tennessee, South Carolina, and then I believe I put Kentucky 4th, Florida 5th.
Yeah, the other 3, bottom 3, kind of. Yeah.
What about your West?
Again, if I'm saying this wrong from what I put on the website, I'm just doing this off the top of my head. LSU 1, Alabama 2. This is where it gets really messy. I think I put Arkansas 3. I'm a KJ Jefferson believer. I think KJ Jefferson and Rocket Sanders are going to have huge years. And then A&M 4, Ole Miss 5, Miss Auburn 6, Mississippi State 7. The floor is a lot higher there in the East, but I don't think any of those teams are bad per se.
No, I think
that's all 7 teams bowl eligible division by the end of the year.
Yeah, and I think 3 through 7 is a jumble. Like it could be. I think Alabama and LSU are 1 and 2 pretty clearly, and then after that, it's a mess. I don't remember exactly what I put either. Which, if you go to GamecockScoop.com, you have our staff picks, but it's just like our aggregated staff picks, so it doesn't matter if I get it wrong. I believe I picked, go ahead.
No, you're good.
I believe I picked Bama 1, LSU 2, Ole Miss 3. I think that I like what they did in the transfer portal for the past 2 seasons. Really, their recruiting's been pretty good, and Kiffin, I don't know, that his teams have an edge usually. But Arkansas 4, and I struggled with which order to put those in. Texas A&M has that best recruiting class ever. Is sophomores now, although a lot of those guys transferred out. And then Mississippi State.
Play calling question for me. I just don't know what the Petrino thing's actually going to look like. They also play. Maybe this is another episode topic. We could talk like fun non-conference games this year. They play Miami in I think week 2.
That is fun. Do you think that there's any way that Georgia isn't a unanimous pick by the media to finish?
They will not be unanimous because if you'll remember last year, somebody picked Vanderbilt to win the SEC East. Over 1,000 people get over 1,000 people get to vote. They're all anonymous anyway. I think people just like throwing a spanner in the works. So no, they will not be unanimous. They will be the overwhelming favorite. I'm more interested in the West. I want to see who people pick between LSU and Bama mostly. I think it skews LSU just because of the quarterback question in Alabama, but that's why I put LSU there at least. But
I think also people are trying. It's to the point where it was kind of like with the Patriots in the NFL over the last like 5 years, where people were trying to be like, this is the year that the demise starts. I think that people are trying to call their shot on.
I do
on
think
Bama.
there is a legitimately fair Alabama question to ask about, all right, you don't grab a quarterback in the portal who was mediocre at Notre Dame in April if you're happy with your other options. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I mean, I know Tyler Buckner had some moments at Notre Dame. He played really well in the Gator Bowl against South Carolina, but he definitely wasn't great. He didn't win that job out of camp, I don't think, or he got benched for Drew Pine in the middle of the year. So if that's what you're grabbing in April out of desperation, I don't know how else to interpret that, I guess is how I should say it. Like, you don't grab a quarterback in April if you feel like you're fine at quarterback.
At the same time, I'm looking over the last few years of Rivals rankings. The class of 2021, Bama was number 1 overall class.
Yeah. Oh, they're still loaded. Like, that's
class of 2022, Bama was the number 2 overall class. And
yep, I mean, they went 10-2 last year in the regular season with Bryce Young. Yeah. And I think anybody reasonable would say they're at least downgrading at quarterback. How much they're going to downgrade that's up to you, but it is a downgrade without question. So
yeah, and then the class of 2023 was the number 1 class in history or whatever it was. But I agree with you. They have a quarterback issue. I think they're still going to win 10 games because they're loaded
and
with 5
flip
stars.
side of that too. The flip side of that is those 2 games they lost last year, LSU, Tennessee. They get both those games at home this year. They were both on the road last year. Maybe that kind of evens things out a little bit. I think they're like big road games or A&M and Auburn. So
I also think we might be overrating Tennessee, but we can talk more about that when we do our game by game picks. But I think us as like the media in general might be overrating Tennessee. I don't know if Joe Milton is as good as Hendon Hooker was.
I don't think he is. I
know he played well in the bowl game, and that was the last time we saw him or whatever. But
I think there is and maybe I buy into it too, a general respect's not the right word, but thought or belief that Josh Heupel's a good enough offensive mind that he can figure it out. Like even that first year at Tennessee, where they were not a great football team by any means, they still scored points. That system, I mean, they ran South Carolina out of the stadium, and next time they were in Knoxville, even without anywhere near the offense they had last year. So I think the belief is more Heupel based than Milton based. That he's just going to be able to scheme his way into stuff. But it's a fair question to ask. I'm sure we can get into it next week.
Yeah, I mean, I have no doubt that they're going to be pretty good. I just don't know that they're like the consensus number 2 that we're putting them as, but I think they're the default number 2 because they have less questions than South Carolina. But
losing the OC too, which that applies to everybody in South Carolina's schedule in September except Furman, I believe, new OC on both sides. Right. But their OC took the South Florida job, and they promoted. I believe they promoted from within. They made their QB's coach the OC.
Which is Heupel just the de facto OC at this point, probably.
He's pretty, but yeah.
Anyway, we will talk more about our specific game by game picks next week. We'll have some more recruiting updates. We'll start to put together that list for who's going to be at the cookout next weekend, which is the big recruiting event to end the summer. And yeah, whatever else happens in the next week. In the meantime, check out GamecockScoop.com. We'll have tons more content coming out of SEC Media Days. There's article posted right now. There'll be something else tonight and tomorrow morning and all next week. And I'm going to keep doing game by game previews all the way up until the season begins. Until next time, this has been the GamecockScoop.com podcast. We'll see you.